World of Warcraft, Beyond the Dark Portal, by Aaron Rosenberg and Christy Golden. Chapter 17.
Finished.
Ner'zhul sank back onto his throne and closed his eyes for a moment before glancing down at the scroll that lay unrolled across his lap. It had taken him months of research, planning, studying, and concentration, but alas, the spell was complete. Once the alignment occurred, he would be able to open portals to other worlds, and his people could once more have a world, many of them even, as vibrant as they were themselves, and it would all be because of him.
Good.
Kilrog rumbled from the stance nearby.
A few more days until the alignment is complete, then we can finally abandon this forsaken place to the humans and begin the task of rebuilding our people.
Ner'zhul regarded the one-eyed old warrior thoughtfully. Kilrog had always impressed him as much for his sharp mind and excellent tactical sense as for his fighting skills, and when the sacred blood Hollow Chieftain had limped back through the portal, Ner'zhul had seen that sending him back out into battle would be a waste. Besides, there weren't many Bleeding Hollow warriors left. 2 years of hiding from humans and their allies had taken a heavy toll on the once large clan. Ner'zhul had chosen to keep Kilrog by his side instead, and to make the Bleeding Hollow clan his bodyguards. His own Shadow Moon clan had not been pleased with that, of course, but they were still numerous enough to be a force against the Alliance. Besides, Ner'zhul thought he was the war chief of the Horde now, not just chieftain of the Shadow Moon. He couldn't show favoritism.
We have a journey ahead of us first,
he told Kilrog. He gestured at the citadel around him.
I cannot risk the spell failing. We have the skies cooperating with us. We must command the cooperation of the very land as well. I need to access the ley lines, as many as possible, so that Draenor herself will power the spell that releases us from this diseased grip.
He sighed.
There is only one place that is ideal for such a task. The Temple of Karabor.
Kilrog's one eye widened, but his expression did not change otherwise.
The Black Temple,
he said in a harsh tone. Ner'zhul nodded. He did his best not to reveal the disgust he felt. He still remembered the war against the Draenei with revulsion and not a little guilt, and the idea of entering their former temple still sent chills down him. But he knew Kilrog and the rest of the Horde did not share his sentiment. For them, the death of the Draenei was still a glorious victory, and the Black Temple a noble spoil. It was time for Ner'zhul to believe this also, if he were to lead them correctly.
If I perform the rite there, we cannot but succeed. I will make arrangements for us to depart at once then,
Kilrog said.
Depart? Where are we going?
Kargoth asked as he stomped into the throne room. The Shatterhand chieftain had a broken arrow shaft protruding from his left shoulder. He reached up now and tore out with a grunt. Ner'zhul had put Kargath in charge of the attacks against the Alliance stronghold, and the fool insisted upon leading many of the skirmishes himself. Most of the time, they never even faced any of the humans directly. The Alliance archers rained down death upon them from above until Kargath got fed up and signaled the retreat. But at least it kept the Alliance occupied, and Kargath as well.
I must go to the Black Temple when the stars align to cast the spell and open the new portals, Ner'zhul explained, rolling the scroll and tucking it securely into his side pouch hanging from his belt. He rose from his throne and patted it absently. It was not the most comfortable seat he had ever had, but was certainly the most impressive. He would have a new one crafted wherever world they went to next. I will gather the troops,
Kargath replied, turning to go, but Ner'zhul stopped him.
No, he said, not yet. Summon Dentarg and Gorfiend. Instead, I will speak with the four of you here and give you each orders.
Kargath hesitated, and Ner'zhul barked,
No!
Kargath raised his scythe-blade hand and slew and hurried from the room.
I will send for Hellscream,
Kilrog said, and turned to leave.
No.
Kilrog turned slowly, eyeing Ner'zhul.
They are still on Azeroth. We need to give Grom and his clan orders as well. No, we do not. Grom Hellscream already has his orders. He is part of this plan as well.
At Kilrog's look of unease, Ner'zhul drew himself up to his full height.
You do not doubt my wisdom, do you, Kilrog?
The moment dragged out, heavy with tension, but Kilrog eventually inclined his head.
Of course not, Shaman. Go, gather your warriors,
Ner'zhul said to Kilrog after Kargath had gone.
Tell them to make ready. We will depart shortly.
Kilrog nodded and left as well, and Ner'zhul began pacing the room. He wondered if the bomb had worked as Gorfin assured him it would. It must have. Grom had not charged through Red Eye's blazing, demanding blood. That was well. Hellscream had always been a difficult one to manage, but he had served his purpose. He was no longer necessary. Kilrog returned shortly, a simple nod confirming that his warriors would be ready. Gorfin arrived a few minutes later, and both Kargath and Dentarg were right behind him.
Good,
He said with all his lieutenants were present.
I've completed the spell.
He told Gorfin and Dentarg, and the two smiled.
I knew you would do it, master.
Dentarg said,
You will be going to the Black Temple then.
Gorfin asked, and his smile widened to a grin at both Ner'zhul and Dentarg's surprise. Ner'zhul realized he should have expected this. Gorfin had been one of the most promising young shaman he had seen in terms of ability and perceptiveness, if not empathy, and he had grown to a powerful, confident, clever warlock even before his death. Since returning as a Death Knight, he had only grown in strength and cunning. He would become a danger soon.
Yes, it is the ideal place to catch such a spell. I can have the Horde warriors ready by nightfall,
Kargath reported.
We will leave behind a small force to man the walls here, and the rest will protect you along the way.
But Gorfin shook his head.
The Alliance won't fall for a ruse much longer, and when they realize we have only been striking to keep them pinned up in their hold, they will attack with their full strength.
Ner'zhul nodded. He had already guessed as much himself.
You will remain here with your clan, he instructed Kargath. Hold off the Alliance forces when they attack, while we go ahead to the Black Temple.
He frowned.
I will need time. You must delay them as much as possible. If you survive, meet us there.
Kargath paled slightly, then straightened and nodded.
The plains before these walls will be piled high with the bodies of the dead,
He promised, raising his scythe hand. He nodded to the other three and then turned on his heels and stalked off. They could hear him shouting orders once he left the room.
They cannot win!
Dentarg commented after a moment.
They don't have to, Ner'zhul replied. All he has to do is keep the Alliance from following us long enough for me to complete the spell.
He shrugged.
The Citadel is strong, and the Shattered Hand warriors are tough. They will put up a good fight. And the rest of our people will honor their memory on all the worlds we conquer in their name.
Of course!
Dentarg took a stubble rebuke with only a slight wince.
I do not doubt Kargath's loyalty or the powers of his warriors. He will fight till the end.
Yes.
Ner'zhul eyed the Shadow Moon Ogre Mage.
And you will fight with him.
What?
This time, Dentarg rocked back in surprise.
But master, you need me at the Black Temple. My place is at your side.
Sudden fury welled up inside Ner'zhul, hot and pure.
Your place is wherever I tell you it is,
He snarled, his voice deepening with his anger. Dentarg's eyes widened.
Your fate!
He murmured, cringing back, fear and shock on his own visible visage.
The skull!
The moment passed, and Ner'zhul felt the fury leave him. He reached to touch his white-painted face. It felt the same to him as it always had.
They have magi of their own, these humans,
He said, his voice gentler.
Someone must be here to stop them. Someone with enough magic to hold his own. Someone I can trust.
He stepped forward, stretching his hand up to place it on the ogre's shoulder. Dentarg stepped backward, and Ner'zhul let his hand fall.
That someone must be you.
Dentarg glanced down at Gorfin.
Why doesn't he stay?
More knowledge of the rifts and portals than you do,
The Death Knight said.
Ner'zhul will need my help with the ritual, or I would stay and teach these humans a thing or two about magic.
Dentarg's small, piggy eyes darted back to Ner'zhul.
I do need him with me,
Ner'zhul said, in an avicular, almost apologetic tone.
And while I would have you there as well, you can aid me far more by being here and lending Kargath your sorcerer's skills.
The ogre finally nodded.
I will do as you command, master. I will stop the human magi, and if I survive, I will join you at the Black Temple.
The desire to see that place and walk its halls was naked in his voice.
Good.
Ner'zhul nodded and turned away. They both knew the chances of Dentarg surviving were slim.
I will leave the Black Dragons here to help the battle. Now go and coordinate with Kargath.
From the corner of his eye, he saw Dentarg nod, and listened as the ogre stalked out of the room. Once those thunderous footsteps had faded away, Ner'zhul turned back to Kilrog and Gorfiend.
Gather your warrior and your death knights, he told them. We leave at once.
Less than an hour later, Ner'zhul was astride a wolf, lopping the Hellfire Citadel, surrounded by Kilrog and his warriors. Gorfiend and his death knights scouted ahead on their reanimated steeds. Behind them, Kargath Bladefist and his orcs cheered from the Citadel walls, chanting Ner'zhul's name. The Horde leader rested one hand on his pouch, making sure the scroll was still there. Knotted the other on his wolf, thick pelt, and wrote it. He did not look back. Chapter 18. Illyria had stayed with Trolling that night. They had talked for a long, long time, and the chasm that had yearned between them had been bridged. When they could speak no longer, they let their hearts and bodies continue the healing. They had merged from his quarters together the next morning, and if there were knowing grins from their friends, both knew there was also genuine happiness. Even though they faced death today, they would do so knowing that there was much joy waiting for them if they survived. And they would survive. Terralion was not about to let her go, not now that they found each other again. He had kissed her hard, and she had slipped off in the pre-dawn light with her rangers. They discussed signals and such, and finally decided on a time. We will douse the lights for 10 heartbeats, then relight them. If we have taken the watchtower. We will douse the lights for 10 heartbeats, then relight them if they have taken the watchtower, she had said. If we haven't taken them all by the time the sun is about to clear the horizon, come anyway. Illyria had said, They will be able to see as well as you an hour later, and this plan will have been for naught. He nodded. Trolling was at peace with her fighting out of his sight now. He knew she would take no unnecessary risks. She had returned to herself again. Daneth would lead the initial decoy charge, while Trolling would bring up the main offense once the Horde forces has engaged them in combat. Daneth and his men would be outnumbered, but not for long.
It will be a harrowing for a while,
Trollian warned him.
You will have to trust that all is going according to plan.
He hesitated.
It might feel like the portal battle all over again, Daneth.
Daneth had regarded his commander with steady eyes.
No worries. No, it won't. This time, we are the ones who are taking those green bastards by surprise. I trust you, Terralion. The ghosts of those dead boys will be fighting alongside us. They'll be at peace when we trap the orcs between two fronts.
Terralion had shivered a little.
Daneth,
he had begun. Daneth waved it aside.
I have no death wish, he said. Don't worry about that. I want to get home one day and bring these boys home with me. I don't want to write one damned more letter that begins, It is with my deepest sympathy.
Trollian had gripped his second-in-command shoulder and nodded. Daneth would hold the orcs long enough for the second force to crush upon them like a tidal wave. Kurdrin and his Griffin Riders, along with Khadgar and some other magi, would be ready to be part of that wave. Trollian would miss the mage's presence. They had been together throughout the Second War, and it would feel strange to go into battle without Khadgar by his side. But if all went well, they would meet up and celebrate their victory. Now he waited in the chill pre-dawn for the signal. Daneth's group had gone around and would be attacking from the rear with horses and loud shouts, while Terralian's group had moved carefully quiet on foot to a place close enough to see the signal, but far enough away that the night still hid them. He gazed at the Citadel a mile-long, solid wall that encased it. At intervals along the wall, huge braziers burned sullenly, casting just enough illumination to show the barest hints of iron spikes that adorned the citadel. Jagged, powerful, and dark, the building had vivid presence. Trollian somehow felt that not only would they need to defeat the orcs within the walls, the living ones, and the Death Knights, but they'd have to defeat the citadel itself. It was an utterly hideous place, angular and organic at the same time, as if it were some massive beast whose flesh had melted in places and exposed the sharp bone that had given it form. He started at the watchtowers until his eyes ached from the strain. There, one of them had gone out, and then been relit. Once the final light had been doused and relit, Trollian heard the sound of human voices raised in battle, shouting, and thunder of the hooves. He waited desperately to charge in, but he forced himself to wait. The Rangers would need time and the opportunity to get to the gate, and that would only come when the orcs manning it had been called to fight Daneth's men. Every second was agony. Finally, when he heard the sound of weapons clashing and the bellow of orc war cries mixing with those of his men, he knew the moment had come. Trollian lifted his hammer and raised it to eye level, where the dull metal head caught the early morning light. "May the holy light grant us strength," he said quietly, and those gathered around him nodded, and a murmur spread among them as his hammer began to shine and then to glow from within. "May it guide us in this endeavor, leading us to victory and honor, and to glory." For an instant, the hammer seemed composed of white light. Then that light burst outwards, washing across them all in a wave, and Trollian knew the others felt the same strength and peace he did. A faint aura clung to the hammer and to each of them, outlining them against the red rock all around, and he smiled at this open sign of light's blessing. Trollian led his men at a fast lope towards the wall. The citadel loomed before them, and the closer they came, the more oppressive and mammoth it grew. He could see the gate now, looking like a mouth and a hideous face, and then, right when he was wondering if he had mistimed the charge, the gate began to open. "She did it!" one of the men whispered. "Of course she did," Trollian said softly. "She's Illyria Windrunner." Light, how he loved her. They were not the only ones who had noticed the gate opening, however. Even as Illyria and her rangers darted forward to join with Trollian's group, a handful of orcs raced after them. Trollian caught a glimpse of Illyria's golden hair in the faint light, and he sped up, breaking into a full run. His hammer rose almost of its own accord and began to glow again, a gleaming white light held high above his head. That caught one orc's attention, and the creature turned toward him instead of the rangers. It charged, and for a moment he thought it weaponless and mad until he saw the scythe that curved the creature for a hand. "For the sons of Lothar!" the paladin cried, tongue liberated as he needed for stealth evaporated. He brought the hammer crashing down, crushing the orc's skull. Even as the first orc dropped, Trollian hauled his weapon back around, striking a glancing blow to one in front of him before smashing an orc 2 paces over with his full strength. Another orc raced towards them, but an arrow suddenly protruded from his left eye, and it toppled without a sound. A fifth snarled and swung a heavy club at his side, but Illyria leaped forward, ducking the blow, and thrust her sword blade, piercing the green-skinned creature's throat, and emerged from the back of his head. Trollian had spun and finished off the orc he stunned, and now he charged up the stairs at full speed, Illyria and her rangers and his men right behind him. The troop of orcs met Trollian as he rounded a bend in the stairs halfway up. They had the advantage of size, strength, and position, but he had momentum and determination. Holding his hammer before him, his hands gripping it just below the head, Trollian used it like a small battering ram, slamming into one orc after another. The force of the impacts jolted him, and he had to fight not to be tottered back a step. But the orcs found themselves tossed aside and either slammed into the wall or toppled from the stairs and fell to the ground below. The orcs that retained enough presence of mind to attack him in turn found themselves pierced with a row of arrows, courtesy of Illyria and her rangers, and any orc Trollian stunned didn't kill the men behind them, but didn't kill the men behind them, finished off as they raced up the stairs behind him. In what seemed like minutes, but Trollian knew had probably been longer, he reached the top. The citadel's ramparts stretched out before him, far longer than honor holds, but less even, more chaotic and oddly shaped. Some orcs stood here, heavy spears in hands, ready to hurl them down upon the approaching army, but most of the horde had poured out of the front gates. Tyrolian and were running up to meet the alliance head on. He also saw long black figures circling above and knew the black dragons were just waiting for the right moment to join the fight. "Alliance!" he shouted, holding his hammer high and racing to the rampart's front edge. "Alliance!" From here, he spotted Daneth riding near the front of his group, and the warrior raised his sword in response. He was covered in blood and gore, but none of it was red human blood, nor had he lost many men. The light was with them. Then, what orcs were still up here reached him, and Tyrolian was busy defending himself and clearing the ramparts of their defenders. The sound of battle were everywhere, metal against metal, stone against plate, flesh against flesh, mixed with growls and roars and bellows and cries. The bodies were all mingled together, the green of the orcs against the pink of the humans, and the brown and blondes of the blacks of horses, and with gleaming sheen of armor and dull luster of axes and hammers mixed in as well. At one point, when he was able to spare a glance, Tyrolian managed to pick out Daneth again, and watched as the warrior impaled a charging orc upon his sword, yanked the blade free, and whirled it to slice another's throat open. Tyrolian had just smashed down the last orc when he heard a loud shriek from above. Glancing up, he saw a cloud sweeping down towards the citadel, carrying a blast of hot air with it. He grinned at the sudden moist heat. The cloud had broken apart, forming a haze that settled over the citadel, blanketing it in fog that blurred edges and hid shapes and details. The fog played tricks with the sound as well, and so when the loud whoop sounded, Tyrolian could not pinpoint its location. Neither could the dragons. It seemed, for they flew in circles, necks curling as they turned their heads this way and that, seeking the source of the sound. They didn't have to search for long. A small shape plummeted out of the fog, dropping like a stone towards one startled dragon. Just as they seemed about to collide, the shape extended long wings, unfurled, and its rapid descent became a sharp, wheeling dive. The griffin, for such it had to be, banked around the surprised dragon. The dragon snapped at it like a dog at an insect, but a half-lion, half-eagle creature was too fast. It darted beneath the dragon as its mammoth jaw closed right where it had been, and the dragon followed it, rearing back, and magma spewed from a long, fiery blast from its muzzle. Again, the griffin and its rider were too quick. Over a dozen orcs shrieked in agony as the dragon accidentally incinerated its allies, too intent on the swift griffin to notice where it had directed its attack. The dragon screamed in anger, slamming into the citadel and cracking the sturdy wall with a tremendous noise. Before it could gather itself and attack again, the wild hammer atop the griffin stood in his stirrups and hurled his storm hammer at the fearsome beast. As it struck the dragon in the eye, the thunderclap tore the fog asunder and brilliant sunlight streamed down. The wild hammer whooped, his hammer returning to his hands as the griffin soared back up in the sunlight, gleaming on its feathers. Shocked, dazed, the dragon tried to fly, but the merciless wild hammer dwarf left it on a merry chase, striking repeatedly at its wounded eye until, half blinded and dazed, it again slammed into the wall, which collapsed beneath the unintentional assault of the great beast. The dragon slid down the earth, shaking it with its dead weight, a victim of its own violence. The remaining dragons screamed their rage and hurled towards the lone griffin rider, who turned to meet their furious headlong fight. But just as they neared him, more griffins burst from the remaining clouds above and descended upon the dragons. Each dragon was easily 4 times the size of a single griffin, but the griffins had speed and agility, wheeling about the larger beasts, luring them to the fortress, directing their fury attacks or sending them keening to one side as they tried in vain to catch the elusive aerial dancers. It looked to Tyrolian as if Curdran's earlier boast might in fact prove to be true. His wild hammers were having enough success with the dragons already that he might as well be done with those creatures soon enough to lend hand to the main assaults. One of the griffins broke away from the rest, heading towards Tyrolian. It bore 2 riders, one small and the other far larger, and the latter leaped down while they were still a short ways away. The broad stone walkway, violet robes streaming around him. Tyrolian felt his face stretch into a grin. Khadgar. The mage waved his thanks to Wildhammer, who had carried him as the griffin beat its wings and rose back to rejoin the aerial fury. Then he turned his white head towards the main tower, eyes narrowing. I've come to help you. When I'm done here, the mage said to Tyrolian, gripping his staff in one hand and drawing the sword at his side with the other. There's someone in there. An ogre mage. I need to deal with him first. Thralian nodded. He'd seen more than enough magic over the past few years to respect Khadgar's opinion on the matter. He turned as two men stationed by the far stairs came hurrying over, broad grins on their faces. Before Thralian could ask why, he heard footsteps from that direction, and then heads appeared as several figures charged up the stairs and onto the ramparts. Figures wearing alliance armor. "Sir!" one of them called as they approached. "We have cleared the north wing." Thralian nodded and returned the soldier's salute. "Good. I'll have a few more men here." He glanced at Illyria, who readied her bow. "The rest of you, come with me. We'll sweep the citadel to make sure it's clean, and then throw open the gates for the rest of our men." They cheered, and he led them down the walkway. Khadgar had just taken, turning off halfway across to follow a narrower stairs down. As he hoped, it would lead him to the heart of the orc stronghold. As soon as Thralian was too busy fighting off the orcs who had remained without worry of Khadgar. Khadgar paced the walkway slowly. His senses extended to study the area ahead of him. The ogre was still there, he knew it. But it did not seem to be doing anything. No spell casting, no ritual. It was simply waiting. Waiting for him. The walkway ended at a tower, and Khadgar stepped inside. The room he entered was large and oddly shaped, not quite circular, and with uneven spaced angles, as if it had been carved from something rather than constructed. At the far end rose a monstrous chair that seemed to be pieced together out of colossal bones. He shuddered to think what beast might have yielded such specimens. Its high back reached almost to the arched ceiling above, and torches gathered to either side. But the throne was empty.
My master is gone.
A deep voice rumbled as a massive figure detached himself from the shadows and moved to intercept him. Khadgar had seen ogres before, of course, but they had been down on the field, and he had been back with the other magi striking from a distance. This was the first encounter with one up close, and he found himself gulping as he stared up and up. The creature's head nearly brushed the ceiling, and while its features were brutish, its deep-set eyes glittered with intelligence. Then he registered what it had said, silently thankful for the ring that enabled him to understand it. "Gone?" The ogre grinned, revealing surprisingly small, sharp teeth and large fangs.
Indeed,
It answered.
"He left here some time ago. Even now he's traveling to perform the ritual while your alliance fights it. While your alliance is fighting its way past us."
The creature scowled and then set its jaw.
"We might die, but our deaths will ensure that the Horde lives on and conquers worlds without end."
Damn! Khadgar cursed, seeing what had happened. The orcs had tricked them. They'd allowed this attack simply so Ner'zhul could escape. Nonetheless, if we're fast enough, we can still go after him, he told the orc, deafened.
"You could,"
The ogre agreed.
"but first you must get past me."
He raised its hands, each one larger than Khadgar's head, and began to glow with a sickly green light that seemed to rise from beneath the skin.
"I am Dentarg of the Shadow Moon clan."
An honorable duel, then. Khadgar of Dalaran, Khadgar replied. He raised his staff, and the tip began to shed a bright violet glow. The ogre executed a clumsy bow. Then it struck. Both of its massive hands slammed forward as if physically shoving Khadgar back. Green light erupted from them in a wave of energy that threatened to envelop and crush the human mage. Khadgar raised the staff, the violet light glowing more intense, and the green wave split around him before bubbling away to nothing. Next, Khadgar struck, pointing the staff at the ogre's chest. The violet light lanced forward, stabbing through the ogre's heart. But Dentarg batted the energy beam aside with his hands. The green still suffused them, protecting him from any ill effect.
"We are well matched,"
The ogre mage remarked. the ogre remarked, clapping his hands together. When it spread them wide, darkness bellowed up between them, a great curtain of black that swept across the room. Perhaps, Khadgar replied. He did not move as the darkness fell, and within seconds he would have vanished from sight, as had everything else. Those other senses, he could still locate the ogre, however, and knew that his opponent was searching for him. Khadgar waited another moment, unmoving, then slammed his staff down upon the floor. The shockwave split the darkness, cracking it as if it were blackened glass, and leaving silvers and shards of it upon the floor, and threw the ogre from his feet as well. The crash Dentarg made as he fell was almost equal to the first shockwave, and the ogre groaned in pain. Khadgar swiftly closed the distance between them. The light around his staff increased until it was a beam of solid light, too bright to be violet, though still tinged with that hue. He slammed the beam-encased staff down against the rising ogre's throat and held it on as Dentarg screamed, his flesh smoking where the staff touched it. It was not a magical attack that saved the ogre then, but an instinctive one. He heaved Khadgar off bodily and managed to regain his feet, though his neck bore a charred black line across it. Dentarg snarled, showing his fangs, and charged Khadgar head down. But the human mage sidestepped the attack and swung his sword as the ogre stormed past, slicing the creature's upper arm. Dentarg cried, charging from one rage to the next, from one of his rage to one of pain. Green light rose again from his hands, though it flickered here and there, and flashes of crimson shot through. Bringing his hands together again, Dentarg let the energy build between them until he had a globe of pure magic, and wreathed and roiled it with hatred. This he hurled at Khadgar, putting all his force behind it. Khadgar studied the fast-approaching globe calmly, then he sheathed his sword and held out his hand, palm upward. The globe connected with his flesh, striking the palm squarely, and vanished into him, absorbed without a trace. "Thank you," he told the astonished ogre. "I feel much better now." He stamped one foot, and a minor shock wave toppled Dentarg again. The ogre landed heavily on his knees and bowed his head, knowing he was on the precipice of a superior opponent. Khadgar spared him any further humiliation, drawing his sword again and bringing it down on the ogre's exposed neck with all his might. Flesh and bone parted cleanly, and he stepped back as the ogre's head rolled across the floor, spraying blood in his wake. For a moment he caught his breath, looking around the throne room, though he knew Dentarg had spoken the truth. He looked down at the ogre corpse, nodded, satisfied, and hurried back to find Tyrolian. They would need to move more quickly.
"Good news!" Tyrolian shouted when he caught sight of Khadgar. "We hold the Citadel."
"We were tricked," Khadgar said without preamble. "Ner'zhul is not here. He left well before the attack. He must have taken the artifacts with him. I wonder if he took the skull as well." Tyrolian stared at him.
"It was all a diversion, then."
"And we fell for it," Khadgar confirmed. Tyrolian frowned, trying to find the good in this.
"Still, this is undoubtedly the bulk of their warriors, and we crushed them. We've also taken their citadel. Even if Ner'zhul himself wasn't here, it was still their headquarters, and now it belongs to us. The military might is broken for good."
"Hey! They'll not find another army again," Danis said, approaching them in time to hear the end of Tyrolian's statement. His armor was battered in places, and he bore several cuts on his arms, legs, and face, but he seemed unfazed by the injuries as he reined in and dismounted beside them. Tyrolian clapped him on the shoulder, happy to see that his lieutenant had survived.
"You did a fine job," he told Daneth, "but Khadgar has discovered some ill news. Ner'zhul is not here. He knew we would attack, apparently, and stole away before we arrived, and we think he took those artifacts with him."
Illyria and Kurdran had joined them now, and Tyrolian filled them in as well. "Well, we'd best be after them, then, eh?" Kurdran replied. "Do you know where they're going?" Illyria replied.
"I don't know," Khadgar said, "but I can find out." He smiled. "I know Gul'dan's magical aura from the war, and I know the Eye of Darlaron as well. I can trace both of them."
The other stepped back as he closed his eyes, murmuring something beneath his breath. The air around him seemed to shimmer slightly, and a wind appeared from nowhere, tugging at their clothes and hair. When the mage's eyes snapped open, for an instant they glowed a bright white and showed strange images dancing within them. Trollian shuddered, looking away. When he turned back, his friend's eyes were normal once more. I found them, Khadgar reported, leaning slightly against his staff. It wasn't easy, though. Turns out they're in 2 different locations. Illyria shook her head. The skull and the eye aren't together. Why would Ner'zhul let either one out of his sight? I don't know, but he has. The skull went north, but the eye is heading southwest, though what I think they call Trekador Forest. I sense the Book of Medivh there as well, which makes me think that's the way Ner'zhul went. I'd assume that he needed the skull for the ritual, just as I needed the book and skull to close the portals. But apparently he sent the skull somewhere else, though I can't imagine why. And you need both, the skull and the book? Trollian asked. Yes, Khadgar replied. I can't close the rift completely without them. Trollian nodded. Then we'll have to go after both, he decided. He glanced at the others, weighing options in his head. Daneth, I think you'd like to kill a few more orcs. Indeed, sir. I would. Trollian sighed. It pained him to see those he was fond of so revenge-ridden. But who was he to judge? He had not seen his whole contingent slaughtered while he fled to get aid. Daneth would have to make peace with his pain in his own way, and as Illyria had finally done. He would need to learn that you could fight without hate in your heart. Fight for something rather than against it. Then go after Ner'zhul. He's got a head start on us, so Kurdran, you and your Griffin Riders scout ahead and find Ner'zhul and his companions. Attack them at once. Kill them or at least slow them down. And report back to Daneth. He'll be following with ground forces. Take some of my rangers with you for scouting, Illyria said. Trollian smiled his thanks at her and said to Daneth, Your job is to destroy Ner'zhul and bring back those 3 artifacts. Consider it done, lad, Kurdran replied and turned away to his griffin. Daneth nodded, saluted, and went as well, to gather the men and get ready for the travel. Trollian turned back to Illyria and Khadgar. Getting that skull and closing the portal are my responsibilities. Khadgar, you're the only one who can trace the blasted thing. And Illyria, he smiled softly, I promised you I would never leave you behind. Indeed you did, my love. I do not think I won't hold you to it. He extended a hand and she took it and squeezed it tight for a moment. There'd be no more parting for them until the final one. And maybe not even then. She grinned. Let's go. Together, the three friends turned away from the conquered citadel and the portal in the distance. They would find the ghoulish relic and would seal the rift forever or die trying.